I will invite Dr. Max Moerman. He is with the Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Cultures, Barnard College, Columbia. Very odd time for you, Professor, to be coming. Max Moerman's interests in Japan are well known. He is the author of Localizing Paradise, and that is about Kumono pilgrimage and the religious landscape of pre-modern Japan, which came out in 2004, and the Japanese Buddhist World Map, Religious Vision and Cartographic Imagination, again, which is a very recent book, which is 2022. So right now, he's here to speak about representing India in the Edo Print culture. And it is a historical approach. And over to you, Dr. Moerman.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. And here we go. There, can you see my slide?
Yes, yes.
Very good. Let me just turn up my volume and I will begin. Thank you very much. India, for Japanese Buddhists throughout the centuries, represented an obscure object of religious desire, a land of origins from which they felt hopelessly removed. Buddhist India, known as Tenjiku in Japanese, or more specifically as Go-Tenjiku, the 5 regions of Tenjiku, was not the India of modern geography. Its borders more fluid and undefined, Tenjiku represented a distant realm beyond the Chinese cultural sphere and the sacred site of the Buddhist past. In the medieval period, the image of India was preserved in the textual and visual representations of the pilgrimage of Xuanzang, the famous Chinese monk whose description of Buddhist India filled the pages of his Great Tong record of the Western regions. In the Edo period, new forms of printed matter, maps, encyclopedias, and popular fiction radically transformed Japan's classical image of Buddhist India and the place of India and Japan in the Buddhist world. My talk today considers the image of India in Japan before and after the age of print culture to trace both the transformations and endurance of India in the Japanese Buddhist imagination. The earliest Japanese map of the world, painted in 1364 by the monk Genshubo Jukai, is informed entirely by Xuanzang's 7th century account. Jukai's painting, referred to in temple inventories as a map of Tenjiku, charts the path of Xuanzang's journey, quotes extensively from his narrative, and traces his route with a red line that winds throughout the western regions and Tenjiku. In Jukai's map of Tenjiku, as in Xuanzang's record, the Buddhist world is contained within an ovoid continent, known in Sanskrit as Jambudvipa and in Japanese as Nansen-bushu, as it is titled here on the right-hand side of the map. Located in the outermost of the 7 seas surrounding Mount Sumeru, the cosmic mountain at the center of the Buddhist universe. In both map and text, Lake Anavatapta marks the center of the Buddhist world, from which 4 great rivers flow from 4 animal heads on each of the lake's 4 sides. A silver ox to the east, a lapis lazuli horse to the west, a golden elephant to the south, and a crystal lion to the north. This distinctive and mythic landmark, inscribed at the center of the map of Tenjiku, would continue to distinguish Japanese Buddhist maps of the world for the next 500 years. Jukai's 14th century map of Tenjiku continued to be reproduced in manuscript copies made by Buddhist monks well into the 19th century. The 13 extant later versions, produced and preserved in temples, suggest the map's context of ritual production. One such copy, this one here, bears the following inscription in the right-hand margin. Quote, "I have made this copy feeling as if I were traveling to Tenjiku." The effective quality of the act of transcription suggests that for this monastic copyist, the map of Tenjiku was both a devotional object and a ritual means of reenacting by quite literally retracing Xuanzang's pilgrimage. In the Edo period, however, Japan's great age of print culture, the manuscript map of Xuanzang's India left the cloistered realm of the temple archive to enter what Beth Berry has called the Library of Public Information. In the year 1710, the Kegon monk Hotan produced a Japanese Buddhist map of the world as a large format woodblock print entitled The Handy Map of the Myriad Countries of Jambudvipa, Nansen Bushu Bankoku Shokan no Zu. This publication signaled a public assertion of Buddhist views of the world and of the relationship between India and Japan, which would reverberate for the next 2 centuries. Although his printed map is clearly based on the earlier manuscript maps of the 5 regions of Tenjiku, Hotan is critical of the manuscript tradition. He declares in his preface, quote, "Many errors are to be found on maps of the 5 regions of Tenjiku." He continues, "In the past, maps of the 5 regions of Tenjiku have been venerated in famous temples throughout Japan. I have examined these maps, but I have found the place names of China and India in disarray and the boundaries of the 5 regions of Tenjiku obscured. This world reaches beyond the distances traveled by the wise men of the past. Not even the famous Buddhist monks Fashan and Xuanzang, who risked their lives traveling to Tenjiku and other distant lands in search of the Tripitaka, tell of it all. Although they describe the 5 regions of Tenjiku, the realms of the barbarian tribes, the Pamir Mountains, and the land of snows, they knew nothing of the foreign lands overseas. They did not even visit Korea, Japan, the Ryukyus, Siam, or Java, countries as minor as scattered millet seeds. Yet in spite of Hotan's critique, his map remains deeply indebted to the earlier manuscript tradition. It maintains the nuclear form of Lake Anavatapta and the 4 great rivers that flow from the mouths of the 4 mythic beasts. India and Central Asia are still at the center of the world, and the place names follow Xuanzang's record of the Western regions, with every kingdom listed and the size of each given exactly as they appear in Xuanzang's 7th century text. Although Hotan drew from numerous contemporary cartographic sources, he nevertheless opts to preserve a geography that was in his day already more than 1,000 years old. Hotan's immediate source for the geography of China was Wang Jianfu's general map of the Ming, published in China in 1663 and in Japan sometime before 1706. A map which was itself informed by the Jesuit cartography of Matteo Ricci and Giulio Aleni. Wang's map is the source for another landform filling the upper right corner of the map, which remains unnamed in Hotan's map, but corresponds in topography and location to the North American continent in the general map of the Ming. South America appears as well. With the same Chinese characters used in Matteo Ricci's world map as a small group of islands south of Japan. As with the Americas, Hotan seems to have simultaneously included and marginalized Europe. Based on the simplified versions of Ricci's cartography published in Japan in the 17th century under the general title of Bankokuzu. Europe appears as an archipelago of islands labeled Holland, France, England, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Greenland, Friesland, Denmark, Moscovia, Poland, Hungary, Turkey, Albania, Italy, and Greece. Northeast of Europe is the land of long hairs and dwarves, and further west still, at the very edge of Europe, Siberia. Hotan's cartography has thus reduced Europe to a cluster of small islands in the northwest margins. South America is likewise demoted to the status of a minor archipelago, and North America remains wholly unknown and unnamed, pushed beyond the map's northeastern boundaries. These are significant choices for Hotan to have made. At the beginning of the 18th century, Europe and its imperial outposts played an increasingly visible role in Japanese diplomacy and trade, and in Japanese intellectual and popular culture as well. By the year 1700, a range of reproductions made available the world maps of Ortelius, Plancius, Vandenkier, Ricci, Verbiest, Blau, and others. Yet in spite of this body of geographic data, Hotan gives no prominence either to the New World or the Old World of European cartography. His Indocentrism relegates Europe and the Americas to a status marginal at best. Just as a unitary historicist narrative would presume a turn toward Western models, Hotan's Buddhist cartography provincializes Europe and the Americas. Hotan's map was also reproduced in numerous reduced format editions. This one, about 1/4 the size of Hotan's original, entitled Map of All the Countries in Jambudvipa, was issued in 1744 by the publisher Honya Hikoemon. Yet in the very same year, the very same publisher issued another world map entitled simply Bankokuzu, Map of the Myriad Lands, the title that went to the world maps based on those of Matteo Ricci. And while it initially seems to be little more than another popular edition of Ricci's world map, it is no mere derivative. The map preserves the American, African, Antarctic continents of Ricci's cartography, but the Eurasian continent is that of Hotan, with cartouches for Tenjiku and each of its 5 regions noted, and with Lake Anavatapta at the center and the 4 great rivers spiraling around it. Hotan's map inspired numerous other popular editions, all of which prioritized a classical Buddhist worldview. The textual inserts of all of these reduced format editions of Khotan's map begin with the following description of the world. Quote, Jambudvipa is located south of Mount Sumeru and is composed of 16 great countries, 500 middle-sized countries, 10,000 small countries, and countless remote countries scattered like millet grains. The classical Buddhist view of the world remained, therefore, not merely viable within the marketplace of Edo print culture, but prominent and popular as well. Yet Khotan's map reached an even more readers through its reproduction in printed reference books, such as Terajima Ryoan's Wakan Sansai Zue, Japanese-Chinese collected illustrations of the three realms, perhaps the most popular encyclopedia of the Edo period, which reproduced the central section of Khotan's map, retitled Map of the Western Regions and the Five Regions of Tenjiku. From Muscovia in the northwest to Mount Lanka in the southeast, Terajima's map of Asia relies entirely on Khotan. The divisions of the five regions of Tenjiku, the names and size of its many kingdoms, and the four great rivers spiraling from its center all derive from the classical account of Xuanzang's pilgrimage as depicted in Khotan's map. Like Honya Hikoemon's map of 1744, Terajima offered his readers a cartographic pluralism. He reproduced the same simplified edition of Ricci's world map that was included in the Chinese source for his encyclopedia, Wang Qi's Sansai Duhui, published a century earlier. Yet the Christian world of Ricci and the Buddhist world of Khotan coexist within the pages of Terajima's vast and inclusive compendia. Terajima's entry for Tenjiku is similarly inclusive. It begins with a quote from Xuanzang, quote, according to the record of Western regions, the great snow mountains lie at the center of the southern continent. China lies to the east, Tenjiku to the south, Persia to the west, and the barbarian realm to the north. Tenjiku is comprised of five regions: east, west, north, south, and central, end quote. Terajima, however, then quotes extensively and without attribution from a recent Japanese source that deeply informed the popular image of Tenjiku in the late Edo imagination. The castaway narrative of Tokubei Tenjiku, a maritime merchant whose ship drifted to Tenjiku in 1627 and who returned to tell of the many wonders of that distant land. The earliest account of Tokubei's adventures, a Tokubei Tenjiku Monogatari, appeared in 1707 and was followed by some 45 different versions, including numerous dramatic treatments for the puppet theater and the kabuki stage. Terajima's entry continues on the following page in a passage lifted verbatim from Tokubei Tenjiku Monogatari of 1707. It reads, quote, before the 15th year of the Kane era, that is 1638, numerous Japanese traveled to Tenjiku and wrote accounts of their journeys. A sailor from Harima province who traveled to Tenjiku departed Nagasaki on the third year of the Kane era, 1626, and arrived in the kingdom of Magadha in Tenjiku the following year. He sailed via Taiwan, Canton, Kochi, that is modern Hanoi, Champa, central and southern coastal Vietnam, and Cambodia to Siam, and then northwest to the mouth of the Ryu Sa River in Magadha. At the castle of Ayutthaya, he presented the Japanese vermilion seal. The India of Tokubei Tenjiku Monogatari, as quoted in Wakan Sansai Sui, is no longer the South Asia of Xuanzang's record, which no Japanese traveler had ever visited, but rather a port within a network of maritime trade connecting East and Southeast Asia. The ancient Indian kingdom of Magadha, encompassing Shravasti, Rajagriha, and Bodh Gaya, is identified with Ayutthaya, the capital of Siam, where Tokubei, quote, presented the Japanese vermilion seal, or shuinjo, an official permit to engage in overseas trade, initiated by Hideyoshi in the 1590s and was continued into the 1630s under the early Tokugawa shoguns. During this period, 350 such permits were issued by the Japanese government to Japanese merchants, 56 of them for voyages to Siam, where the port of Ayutthaya was the center of intra-Asian maritime trade in the early modern period. Terajima continues to quote from Tokubei's narrative as he goes deeper into Tenjiku. He then traveled upriver to the castle at Bangkok and to the city of Kurihisara, where long ago Kukai of Japan and the Bodhisattva Manjushri are said to have engaged in a battle of wisdom. At the temple of Tehiyatai, where the remains of the dwelling of the Buddha's disciple are the remains of the dwelling of the Buddha's disciple Sudatta. Vulture Peak lies 42D upriver from the capital city. Terajima's entry reflects the popular Edo understanding of Tenjiku, a Buddhist land not reducible to India, but extending well into Southeast Asia. The ancient Indian kingdom of Magadha, where the Buddha's disciple Sudatta once lived, where Kukai sparred with Manjushri, and where Shakyamuni preached the Mahayana Sutras on Vulture Peak, were to be found in Siam. Quote, the names of the places in Tenjiku, unquote, according to the Tokubei Tenjiku Monogatari, include, quote, Tonkin, Kochi, the birthplace of Bodhidharma, Chambusa, Luzon, and Kabocha, end quote. Lands within the modern borders of Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Yet even with so capacious an understanding of Tenjiku, the classical image of Xuanzang's India remained indelible. The map of Tenjiku here, a large format woodblock print published by the Pure Land monk Zonto in 1828, may conform to the outline of contemporary European maps of India, yet it divides the subcontinent into the 5 regions of Tenjiku and maintains Lake Anavatapta at its center, together with the 4 animal heads out of whose mouths flow the 4 great rivers. Hundreds of cartouches bearing the place names of Xuanzang's route are connected by dotted lines marking his itinerary, with the direction and distances between them each carefully noted and passages from Xuanzang's record quoted throughout. The map includes such sacred sites as the Bodhi tree, the Diamond Throne, and Vulture's Peak, here with an avian head. Zonto writes in his preface, quote, children are unable to read the detailed descriptions of India that Xuanzang recorded in the many volumes of his record of Western regions. With this map, however, They can see it all clearly at a single glance, end quote. Zonto's print thus makes the India of Xuanzang visible to all, but in a manner altogether new. He has taken the geographic contents of Xuanzang's 7th century record, as they had been preserved within the manuscript tradition of the map of 5 regions of Tenjiku, and reconfigured it within a contemporary cartography of the subcontinent. Buddhist views of the world, of the universe, and of India were well represented, and at times prominently so, within the marketplace of ideas and the print culture of 18th and 19th century Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Moerman. It is a very interesting presentation, and it is quite inspiring to see that India has been represented without even seeing that country. I mean, the kind of the sources of inspiration came from travelogues, then the Buddhist wisdom contained in the text, and of course, maybe mythology. All these were sources of the cartography that was tried out. Now I'll open for a couple of questions on the floor. Would anyone have a few questions?
I just want to ask.
When you say Tenjiku, the Tenjiku means exactly what? 10 is the heaven.
10 is heaven,
Huh?
and heaven and bamboo.
Heaven
Heavenly
and
bamboo is the characters.
Okay, all right. So why the heaven and bamboo are placed together?
I don't know. It's a Chinese term. It's used by Xuanzang. It must have been a Chinese translation term for India. Although Xuanzang does use the term Indo, which is the modern Japanese word for India. In fact, that he uses that to speak more specifically of the subcontinent, whereas Tenjiku also includes areas of Central Asia for him.
Any other question? Yeah, please.
Professor, I didn't get the name of the cartographer you were referring to.
Of the
Japanese
printed map.
Yeah.
The printed map, the cartographer is named Hotan, who actually is quite a prominent Kegon monk of the Edo period. He was a Kyoto monk, and he founded Kegonji, which is actually still exists and is a prominent temple in the Arashiyama area. He was also a major commentator on classical texts. He wrote a 15-volume commentary on the Abhidharma Kosha. He wrote commentarial texts on major texts of the Kegon or the Huayan or the Avatamsaka tradition, and he was also sort of a public intellectual who carried on written debates with other Buddhists. He had debates with Jiyun Sonja about the history of the Kashaya, the monastic robes in India, when there was a movement to return to Indian forms in the Edo period, and he carried out debates with other intellectuals in the Kokugakusha movement and other groups. Yeah, he was quite a prominent figure at the time.
Is that the only map maker that you've referred to, the cartographer? What about the wooden block?
Yes, he's the one who made the woodblock print of 1710. The earliest manuscript is attributed to a monk by the name of Jukai. And that's a 14th century manuscript that's in the collection of Horyuji. The other copies that I sort of quickly scrolled through to show how that manuscript map was transcribed really for the next 500 years. Some of them have the names of the monastic copyists associated with them. The one with that inscription that describes feeling as if he was traveling to Tenjiku when he was transcribing the map is by an otherwise unknown monk named Zenjo. But there are a number of other copies. The one in the Kobe, there's a couple in the Kobe Museum. I'm glad that we have the curator of that museum in the conference. The Kobe Shiritsu has three very important examples of manuscript maps in this tradition. One of them, an 18th century one, has the names of two monks on it. Another one in the collection of Chionin has the name of the monastic copyist. So we do have a bit of a paper trail that we can sort of follow the history of replication of this map. And the interesting thing is that the map didn't change. And that wasn't because they weren't aware of other forms of cartography. Some of the manuscripts I showed you were made into the 19th century, but rather they were devotedly kept the same because they preserved this sacred landscape of Xuanzang's text, even though they were other styles of maps, European style maps, circulating, centuries before.
Just one additional question is, I get what you're saying, but did the merchants have different kind of maps? Basically, navigational maps,
The people who actually traveled.
Yeah, the people who actually traveled, yes.
Yes, the people who actually traveled had portalin charts. They had quite sophisticated maps that seafarers use. There are Japanese versions of portalin charts that look very much like Spanish or Portuguese maritime maps that have the boundaries of the countries and the rum lines that are used to navigate or actually to gauge one's distance from different ports. So these maps were never used for actual traveling. These maps were always operating in the imagination, as most maps do, right? Very few maps are actually used for the practical purposes of traveling. Certainly world maps, right? You never walk around with a world map to figure out how to get from one space to another. They are rather a sort of different kind of pictorializing of the world, more a world view. Whereas when you actually, when you have to get from Nagasaki to Vietnam or something, you have sailors have maps as well as log books and certain navigational skills and techniques rather than these maps.
Thank you, Professor.
Any other question? Yeah, please.
When you mentioned navigational techniques, is there information on navigational instruments that they're used?
That I don't know. They were certainly familiar with European navigation instruments. That is, the European sailors, used them and brought with them. The Jesuits brought with them and left as gifts different kinds of, tools of navigation, as well as things like astrolabes. But I don't believe that the Japanese necessarily used those those same navigational tools, but they did use portal charts that are nearly identical to European style portal charts. And I really don't know that much about the sort of the navigational techniques of this time, but as we saw in the Namban Byobu that Alexandra showed us earlier this morning, there was an international community of sailors that were traveling throughout Asia, and certainly even after say the Iberians were no longer accepted and the Dutch were trading there, that there was a knowledge, a sort of international knowledge of navigation. And many of the trading ships were, in a sense, international, right? We call them Japanese traders, but they were Chinese, they were Korean, and even in the European ships, right? We had Indian and African and Southeast Asian crew members. So this was not a closed world as we traditionally think about this period. Certainly not on the oceans.
Thank you.
There are no further questions. Thank you, Dr. Moerman. It is a wonderful presentation.